much that we take for granted. Now imagine living that hard life, being in the desert, and God just tells you to get up and go. This is the life that Abraham lived, right? Most of his life, Abraham was traveling, he was wandering, he was just surviving. Now, he was wealthy, he had a lot of livestock, but it's not like he settled in one town and kind of built this empire and was living on the high hog. He was always traveling. And his entire life, he's just wandering from desert place to desert place, desert place to desert place. Get up and go. God would tell him to go. He would get up. He would travel. This was his life. His wife Sarah was barren. They couldn't have children. Can you imagine how devastating that is? God tells Abraham that I'm going to bless you and you're going to have many children, and if you look up and look at the stars, if you can count them, that's going to be your offspring. You and Sarah are going to have a child. Abraham, I think, probably would have had a hard time believing that because they were old. They were past the years that Sarah was able to have children. And guess what happened? You think Sarah got pregnant? Nope. She had to wait and wait and wait. And they're still traveling, and they're surviving, and they're picking up life. Do you ever feel like life is that way? Probably not the weight that Abraham and Sarah carried, but in church work, don't sometimes we just feel like, are we ever going to go anywhere? See, our theme this year is on revival. It's on how God is a God who takes that which is broken. He takes those who are lonely, those who are oppressed, and God revives that. God is the one who revives people. God lifts people up out of the ashes, and he gives them new life. And if you go back and you think about Abraham and what God was doing in his life, and how God picked one person, just like at the well, at Jacob's well, he picked one person. He picked this Samaritan woman to reveal himself as the Messiah, and loads of people came back and believed in the Christ because of that interaction. And I think so many of us place our significance in how well we're doing Christianity. And sometimes we look around and we get frustrated and we're like, oh, God, we're not making any ground. And God tells us, what? I will provide. And we need to remember that message. Yesterday I was in Parkersburg, West Virginia. I was doing a training with Grace for a church there. And one of the questions that one of the leaders asked at the end, we were doing Q&A before I left to come home. One of the church leaders said, how do we keep moving forward when we're seeing people walk out the doors and people get frustrated and we're doing everything we can to really keep things together and people still leave? How do we minister to people when we're just struggling to make it another day? And I said, it's kind of interesting because I said, when you're faithful to God, sometimes it doesn't look like this vibrant, wonderful ministry. Think about Abraham. Do you think Abraham was like skipping through the desert like, woo, look at this huge community that I'm building? No, he was living mostly by himself. It was him and his wife minus children for years and years and years. For decades, he lived that way. There was no vibrant church. There was no vibrant community. He didn't have this big support system. It's not like he was, being lifted up by people and they were giving him pats on the back and like, Abraham, how wonderful a faithful man you are. I think for him it was really hard to look into the future, and he had to completely trust that what God was saying was true. Now think about that for a minute. We see evidence of that, right? We look around, we see evidence of God working, and we see community, and even within our small congregation, we're really connected with each other. We see the blessing in that. Abraham didn't. He's out there in the desert with him and his wife, waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and they're getting older, and they're getting older. And I think at some point Abraham was probably like, okay, God, I've been faithful. I've trusted you. I've leaned into you. When is Sarah going to get pregnant? And then Sarah comes, she says, Abraham, maybe God meant that we're going to have kids through somebody else. And you need to go to Hagar, and you guys need to come together. And so Abraham does. And they had Ishmael, and God comes back and says, what? Abraham, I will provide. I told you that you're going to have offspring through you and your wife, through Sarah. And did Sarah get pregnant? Nope. They waited and waited and got older and older, and they're still living in the desert, and then Sarah gets pregnant. It finally happens. The day is here, and they celebrate, and there's a lot of joy, and there's excitement, and I can't imagine with their little cane and walkers how excited they were, right? Like, this is incredible, and it's miraculous. Finally, the day is here, and so Isaac is getting older, and then this happens. We're going to go back and reread this text. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. The text continues, but I think in this moment Abraham's heart stopped. Can you imagine? After all these years of being faithful, after giving God everything, he gave him his life, he gave him his all. Every time God said, get up and go, Abraham did it. Abraham was faithful every breath of his life. And finally, God gives the son, after all this confusion, and after having another son from another woman, and after all this confusion, they finally have their baby, and God says, now I want you to take him, and I want you to sacrifice him. Can you imagine the weight of that? So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from afar. And then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. I think at this point, I don't know what was going through his mind, but I can imagine what would be going through my mind. My heart would be in my feet. And I'd be thinking, God, why? Why this? Why now? Why this instruction? Why even torture me with this? Why? And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So that they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father, Abraham, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Can you imagine the son who God told you to take his life looks at you and says, Dad, where's the burnt offering? We stopped the text here. But if you have your Bibles, open up to Genesis 22. I love verse 8. Abraham said, God will provide. God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. And so they went, both of them together. And by the way, Abraham, you all know the story. Abraham was going to follow through. He was going to do it. He had the knife up in the air. He was going to take his son's life. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that level of faith? Can you imagine that level of trust? Can you imagine in your mind thinking, God, I know you're going to provide some way, somehow, but I just don't get it. But God, you told me to do it, and I'm going to do it. Sometimes we struggle to get out of bed and just show up for God. Abraham trusted God and leaned into God and said, God, I don't understand this at all. Sometimes I feel like we're so guilty of providing answers for people that we just start to give cliches. And we're like, oh, well, we kind of cliche people to death, right? Just smile and, things will get better. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But one thing for sure, God will provide. We tell people, oh, maybe if you just have more faith, God will rain all these blessings on you. You'll have a good job, you'll have a steady job, you'll have a home, you'll have all these things. And then people start losing things. They start losing family members who are sick. They start losing homes that they worked so hard to keep because they lost jobs. People lose things, and if we look around, we see people who are losing so much in life, and at some point they begin to get despondent, and they say, you know what, I thought that God was going to give me all these things if I just was faithful to him. And I think that's one of the problems, is that we tell people God's going to give you all this happiness and all this money and all these material things, and we fail to point people to God. Right? We're pointing people to the things instead of pointing people to God. And I think if we stepped back and we told people stories about Abraham and Abraham's faithfulness, and how had this one man not been faithful and done what God told him to do, we wouldn't be here today. Isn't that incredible? It's so cool. And it's so neat to see how God works. And I just want to offer encouragement today, because I think sometimes we fail to see the revival, and we just get tired and we look around and we're like, man, we're just so worn out. My phone was buzzing this morning. I was getting messages from different people, people that are sick. Mike Leck right now, I don't even know if he's watching, because he's just really ill. He's really sick. And Lisa messaged me and said, we're just really struggling, and, Mike is sick, and I'm sitting with him in the home. That's people's reality. And I think sometimes Christians are just waiting for this next big thing, and they get so discouraged. But yet, when we look at the big picture, right? We look at the big picture. We see that each and every one of us matters to God, and each and every one of us is leaving a legacy when we're faithful to God, because God will provide. God is a God of restoration. God is a God of revival. God takes the broken and he builds them up. God is using each and every single one of you to bless other people. God is using each and every single one of you to raise up faithful children. For your grandparents, God is using you when you're faithful to him to instill a faith in your grandkids, to encourage them and to leave the legacy behind. Look at what happened today, this morning. We just read about the Samaritan woman who was at the well of Jacob. Do you know who Jacob was? Who dug the well where Jesus met with the Samaritan woman? Jacob was Abraham's grandson through Isaac. Isn't that cool? God will provide. Don't get discouraged. Look back and look at the big picture, and look at how God has blessed you in your life. I'm not a journaler. I don't journal things. I don't write things down, because I'm just not good at it. I've tried it before, and I just don't do it. But if we actually sit back and look at what God has done in your life, I look at pictures. I go back and I look at pictures. This is not an ad for Google Photos, but I love Google Photos because it's unlimited storage. all you Apple people. Haha. No, I'm just kidding. Google is unlimited storage. Unlimited. For free. And they organize the photos, and you can do like word searches, and so I can like Eden and I were just doing it last night. She's like, I want to watch a video of Cameron. So we just typed in videos of Cameron. Every video that we've ever taken from the time he was born just pops up. It's so cool and scary. They're listening. Just kidding. But not really. But I love going back and looking at pictures, because sometimes we lose focus, and we're like, we get caught up in the moment, and we're like, okay, right now I'm just so discouraged. And if you're at that point right now, go back and write down the things that God has done in your life, because when I go back and I look at the things that this congregation has done, just this congregation has blessed so many hundreds, if not thousands of people. This congregation alone has blessed hundreds, if not thousands of people. A couple weeks ago, I put up a picture of the beds that we bought for in Haiti. We bought brand new beds, and there are pictures of orphans sleeping in these beds. This church did that. There's a ministry that's going on. 16 orphans are in school right now, as of a couple weeks ago, because of you, because of this congregation. Education is life in Haiti, and these 16 orphans that are now in school, because of you, are going to go on and they're going to raise families. And by the way, they're being taught and they're being brought up by a Christian family. They're being taught God, and they're being blessed with school and education, and they're being blessed with beds because of you. So when we go back and we look, we have to look at the blessings and say, you know what, sometimes it doesn't feel like God is really moving in our lives, but guess what? He is. God will provide. It's incredible. If you, we're not going to read in Hebrews chapter 11, but if you read Hebrews chapter 11, Abraham is given more time than any other person in Hebrews chapter 11. That's the by faith chapter. By faith, Abraham went. By faith, when they were told that they were going to have a baby, Abraham believed and it happened. By faith, Abraham was told to sacrifice his son Isaac, and God provided. God blessed a nation through Isaac. God will provide because God is a God of revival. Never, ever forget that. If there's anybody this morning who has not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, or anybody who has any prayer needs, we would encourage you to come up, or our shepherds will be in the back. You can go back there and talk to them as we all stand and sing together.